Spare, Australia. Harry explains that he went to Australia for a round of military exercises, and whilst there, he got word that William and Kate's second child had arrived, thus he was an uncle again. And he explains that one journalist questioned him about it as if he'd received a terminal diagnosis. Of course, he explains that he was absolutely thrilled, and he couldn't be happier. It would appear that the journalist was trying to get to him about the fact that he moved down the line of succession, no longer even the spare of the spare. He said he felt that it was a good thing to be further from the centre of the volcano. He explains, I'd once heard a courtier saying that when you were fifth or sixth in line, you were only a plane crash away. I couldn't imagine living that way. Interesting that he uses that phrase, of course, because that's well attributed to his wife, making the remark about them only being one plane crash away from the throne. And one wonders whether he's included that as a consequence of what his wife has said, or whether it's something that was regularly discussed between him and his wife. Perhaps it was something that his wife would regularly bring up. Wouldn't be a surprise, given her absence of emotional empathy. Of course, once again, his pet hate, the press, gets mentioned, and he then said that he was being compared to Bridget Jones. And he thought that that was a rather strange line of questioning. And then that's it. Now, interestingly, he becomes an uncle again, and of course, it's Charlotte, so a niece. But you'd think he might perhaps talk a little bit about his relationship with Charlotte. Perhaps he's saving that for another occasion. But you'd think he'd perhaps talk about his relationship with George and with Charlotte and what it means to him. But again, probably under the direction of Harry's wife, we don't get anything about it. And we get, once again, the yawn where the press were trying to needle me. Yes, Harry, we get it. And it becomes rather tedious after a while that you keep telling us about that you have a difficult relationship with the press, except for that 2-year period when apparently you didn't notice them. And after that, he explains that people often speculated that he was clinging on to his bachelor life because it was so glamorous. And many evenings he said that actually it wasn't that the case. He said he would go back to folding his underwear and watching the one with Monica and Chandler's wedding. He explained that often he did his own chores, his own cooking, his own food shopping. Wow. Well, I suppose on one level, many people would think that we'd have footmen running around doing this for him. And therefore, I think it's fair enough that he points out that he's actually doing it himself. But on one level, it's quite entertaining because he states it as if this is some kind of achievement. And he explained that there was a supermarket by the palace and he went there at least once a week. He explained that he would arrive at different times, he would wear a disguise, he'd go round the aisles very quickly, grabbing the salmon fillets that he liked, the brand of yoghurt that he'd liked, a few Granny Smith apples and bananas, and of course some crisps. So fascinating insight there into some of the dietary habits of Harry. He explained that he honed his grocery shopping down to 10 minutes. But then he found that everything had moved. Yes, that's what happens, Harry, in supermarkets. They do it regularly. And again, it's quite entertaining the way that which he reveals this as if this is some massive shift in the space-time continuum to find that, yes, things within a supermarket have been moved around. He explains that he hurried over to an employee and asked, "What's happened? Excuse me, where is everything? Why has everything moved? Honestly, yes, honestly, to keep people here longer so they'll buy more stuff." I was gobsmacked. You can do that by law? I mean, really? Again, if he's not telling us about his frozen todger and smearing in cream and thinking about his mother, he's once again been encouraged to reveal what a dimwit he is. He has been strung out here with much of what he reveals. And it's undoubtedly the case that his wife is behind this. Because if she has his best interests at heart, which she claims, she would have prevented him from having such things as this put in. Because whilst he might have been encouraged to do this once again as, oh, it's quite a funny little anecdote and it makes you seem relatable, it actually just makes him seem like an utter dimwit, that he's surprised that supermarkets move their produce around. Everybody knows they do that. And if you were going every week, Harry, surely you'd come across that before. And to come out with a comment of, I was gobsmacked, you can do that by law, just shows him to seem like he has no idea of what the world is really like, and makes him look detached and something of a doofus. Probably, of course, not unintentional at all. But once again, if only he had been advised by someone that knew what they were talking about, to focus on not these bits of frippery and minutiae which just make him look stupid, but instead to get into the meat of what went on in Afghanistan and Iraq, to talk about Invictus, to just separate buck about his mother, giving it greater depth and a meatier read. In actual fact, he could have done more than the 4 books that he's allegedly going to do. He could do one about his relationship with members of his family. He could do one with regard to the relationship with his mother and how her death has impacted upon him. He could do probably a couple about his experiences in the army and Iraq and Afghanistan. He could do something about his various relationships that he's had. He could do one talking about Invictus. He could do one talking about being at the North Pole and the South Pole. That's what, 6, 7 books already, and he's not even got onto the topic of Harry's wife. But instead, you get what is a very unsatisfying scattergun approach of just dipping into little bits here and there as we race through his life, not really putting any meat on the bones. And it's rather unfortunate, because I actually think that he would, in the right hands, be given a lot more opportunity to show more depth in terms of who he is about. Instead, he's been clearly encouraged to maintain the whine-a-thon approach, which is, oh dear, complaining about the press, complaining about members of the family, complaining about not being supported. It's boring, it's tedious, and it grates on one's nerves. Anyway, we continue with the shopping story, and then after that, there was a discussion about him marrying, and then he was back in shop. Apparently, people were asking whether he might be gay, and then he's back shopping, and there's an older married couple abusing the cashier, and he said it was unpleasant at first, then intolerable, and he stepped forward and said, "Excuse me, not sure what's going on here, but I don't think you should be speaking to her like that." The couple abusing the cashier recognised Harry, and they weren't in the least surprised, however, just offended to be called out on their abuse. The cashier tried to thank him, and he wouldn't hear of it. And he gave us some support, again demonstrating his emotional empathy and his empathic trait of justice, wanting to get the right outcome. Then he tells us about shopping for clothes, and that was less complicated. He didn't think about clothing because he didn't fundamentally believe in fashion, and he couldn't understand why anybody would. He apparently got mocked on social media for his mismatched outfits, his ratty shoes, and he would often get the piss taken out of him for what he was wearing. He was given an absolute gorgeous pair of black brogues by his father, and they weighed as much as bowling balls. He wore them until the soles developed holes, and then he was mocked for wearing holy soles when he finally got them fixed. He explained that he received from his father an official clothing allowance every year that was strictly for formal wear. For his everyday casual clothes, he'd go to TK Maxx, the discount store, and he was particularly fond of their once-a-year sale, whereas I believe that they've pointed out that they don't hold sales, so that there is an error with the recollection here. He talked about his system of shopping there, and he explained that if he found something promising, he'd hold it to his chest or legs, stand in front of a mirror. He'd never dawdle over colour or style, and never went anywhere near a changing room. Apparently, if it looked nice and comfortable, into the bucket it went. If he was on the fence about it, he'd ask Billy the Rock, the police officer. Then he explains that he stopped going out in 2015, that he stopped entirely doing so. No more occasional dinners with mates, no more house parties, no clubs, no nothing. He'd go home, eat over the sink, catch up on paperwork with friends on in the background. Sometimes his dad's chef would stock up his freezer with chicken pies, cottage pies, so he was grateful that he didn't have to go out to the supermarket. And he says that the pies reminded him of the Gurkhas and their goat stew. Then after dinner he'd smoke a joint, trying to make sure the smoke didn't waft into the garden of his neighbour, the Duke of Kent, and then he'd turn in early. He felt lonely, but he said that lonely was better than panicky, and he said that he was beginning to discover a few healthy remedies to his panic. He realised that he didn't like being outdoors, and he explained that after one speech, his brother came up to him and laughed at him, saying that he was drenched, presumably in sweat. He said he couldn't fathom his brother's reaction. He'd been present for his very first panic attack. Apparently they were driving out to a polo match in Gloucestershire in their Range Rover, and he was in the back, and William looked at him and saw him sweating and red-faced and asked him if he was all right. And every few miles he said that he wanted to ask his brother to pull over so he could jump out and try and catch his breath. He knew something was up, but he couldn't believe that his brother could be so insensitive about it. Well, it might be that because his brother didn't realise what was actually going on. But he also said he was at fault because he should have recognised his own crumbling emotional and mental states for what they were, particularly because he tried to discuss the launching of a public campaign to raise awareness around mental health. Next, more Diana.